may be used during the meeting. I've already announced the name of the member participating remotely, and this announcement must be recorded in the minutes. I can tell you that the phone is working because I already talked to Helen, and it's clearly audible to those present at the meeting. And because we have a remote participant, we will have to take all votes by roll call vote. I think that's all I'll say for the time being. Let me go on to the calendar. I'd like to note in particular that the Override Study Committee, there are 2 meeting dates that are shown. They're very important. I think the public should attend to the extent that they can, because there are lots of very interesting discussions going on about a number of subjects. And I would also note that there are dates for a number of superintendent conversations with parents in various communities. And I would urge you all, if you haven't already, to attend the 21st Century Fund Gala, which I think is on the 16th of November, not too far away.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
I
madam.
believe, if you'll permit me, that one of the requirements of the remote participation is to establish that the person on the phone can hear us and that we can hear her for her participation.
I'm having difficulty hearing Rebecca.
You are having difficulty hearing her?
You perfect, but Rebecca, I heard every other word.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll have to ask Rebecca to speak up. Rebecca, could we try that again, please?
I've now accomplished my intent, Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
in
you have,
establishing.
and I congratulate you. Yes.
Can you hear me, Helen?
Now I hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Stone. Okay, I would accept a motion in connection with the consent agenda.
So moved.
I have motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chang. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Do we not have to do this by roll call vote?
Oh, we have to do it by roll call vote. How quickly one forgets.
Because it's unanimous on that side, Joe?
Say again?
You can't say that it's unanimous on that side?
Nope,
No.
that's, it's part of the law, sorry.
Very good.
Aye. Yes.
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 Yeah.
Okay, nicely done. Next on the agenda then are subcommittee reports, and Ms. Kershaw, Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Subcommittee of the School Committee met this past Monday. We had a lengthy agenda, of which we got through part. And the primary agenda items, the first quarter financial report and a series of budget transfers, are on the agenda later. So I'll hold my report for then. And we also, at some length, discussed the enrollment growth issues and pressure on the FY15 budget, which is also on the calendar, on the docket for later. So I will just say that our next meeting is on November 18th. One of the items we did not get to fully discuss is the budget guidelines, the school committee's budget priorities and guidelines for FY15. We did distribute a draft of that, and I would accept individually comments and feedback in order to incorporate that into our discussion at the next meeting. And I'll hold the rest of our report for later in the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kershaw. Capital improvements, I think we have a vote. Ms. Stone, are you going to do capital improvement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I believe I'm going to handle this with Ms. Charlepsky participating remotely. A little bit easier for me to do it in person. So we have a vote. We can do the vote first and then the updates. Would that be okay? This is a very standard bit of business for us. We typically get requests in an attempt for the school system to continue to be efficient in its procurement of standard systems across the buildings. We are typically asked when we have new equipment to buy for either a renovation or a new building or an upgrade to use the same proprietor to buy from as we have in the past, so that regular maintenance, replacement parts, and things like that can be cheaper for the system overall. So this is an efficiency measure. That the request comes from Charlie Simmons, our Director of Public Buildings, and this is to approve a vote for proprietary equipment for hardware, energy management systems, and a fire alarm for the Lawrence School in the modular classroom addition. It's important to have this vote. The Board of Selectmen and the Building Commission take it as well. And with that, we can move expeditiously to procure these things for the modulars. So I move that we approve this request from Mr. Simmons.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Is there any discussion? I'll just comment that this has come up from time to time in a routine manner and makes a lot of sense. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your, no. Roll call, sorry about that.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. See?
Helen, do you want me to continue with capital, or do you want to handle it from there?
I think the only thing to report, I think, is the Pierce School, so please go ahead.
Okay, so the Pierce School auditorium is finished. We have not had as far as I know, where is Mr. Rowe? Do we have a ribbon cutting? Is there something not scheduled yet? I have not had the opportunity to be there since the bleachers went in, but I am told that the room is spectacular and that everybody is enormously happy. And we are all tremendously relieved that that project is finished and finished so nicely after waiting so long. So that's a great thing for the Pierce School. I also wanted to say that we do have a preliminary project schedule for the Lawrence modulars, for which we just approved a proprietary equipment purchase. We are currently in the middle of the schedule. The walkthrough of possible contractors is scheduled for November 13th, and the bids are due from the general contractors by December 11th. And then we have a projected construction start of the school vacation week in February, and final move-in and furniture and equipment over August. Although, as the architect has explained to us many times, the actual construction, because these are built off-site and modular construction, the actual big equipment construction is limited to very few weeks. It's about, 6 weeks, I think, the architect has said in the past, which is extraordinary to put up a 4-classroom building, essentially. And then, of course, there's finishes and landscaping, and there's still going to be a lot of disruption. I did want to make sure, Mr. Rowe, I know we're not in charge of this. I assume it's the Building Commission or Public Works, or who handles notifying abutters of the construction times and street disruption and things like that. I just want to make sure the community is.
Sure. It will be managed by the Building Department, and Tony Quigley will be the designated project manager.
Great.
So he has experience in this, so I think he knows the
And I believe, yes, I know he has lots of experience. I believe we have the intention, if not a schedule yet, of still involving the ad hoc building.
Yeah, we haven't set a schedule yet, but we will set some meetings that we'll have as we go through the course of the project to make sure that we both communicate with interested neighborhood groups, as well as include questions and communication with the constituents, both parents and staff, to get the project done.
Great, thanks. And that's my piece. Ms. Scotto, did you have anything?
Thank you very much, Ms. Stone.
Helen, was there?
Well done.
No, I don't have anything else right now. There's a building commission meeting next week, and there will be on Tuesday, and there will be a capital subcommittee meeting on Wednesday.
Great, thank you.
Great. Curriculum, Ms. Scotto. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep,
Dr.
and-
Lupini.
And also, don't forget an MSBA meeting. Thanks, yeah, on November 20th. We did engage late last week in a conversation with staff and have it from them that they will be recommending the requested number on the devotion project to the board. That number, I believe, is 1,010 is the student enrollment based on that project, based on the calculations of 5 classrooms per grade level. It will be recommended by staff to the board on the 20th.
Great.
What's that date again, Dr. Lupini?
20th, November 20th,
November 20.
10 a.m.
Thank you. Okay. Once again, Ms. Scotto, curriculum.
Very short report. Our November 12th meeting is not being held. We will meet again on December 10th, at which time, though it isn't finalized yet, I believe we will be discussing the strategic plan.
Great. Thank you for being so efficient, Ms. Scotto. Let's see, negotiations, Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I want to start with government relations, though, if that's all right with you.
Sorry
Actually,
about that.
we can simply finesse negotiations. We
Okay.
have nothing to report in
Okay.
negotiations, so let me move to government relations and consider that as well. There is a meeting of the government relations subcommittee, which is simply any members of the school committee who wish to show up to talk about. We will be discussing a first draft of the legislative priorities, and a draft for discussion will be circulated prior to the 14th, probably after this weekend. So you can all look to that, and I hope as many of you as are interested can come to that meeting. We'll be meeting at 5 p.m., so in the hour before our regular school committee meeting for government relations. Mr. Chairman, would you like me just to go on to? Oh, sorry.
Is there anything we need to discuss on government relations that pertains to town meeting, which is the following week, or?
No, there have been no, typically we only do that if there's a warrant article that requires us to weigh in or on which the school committee feels it has a position that's important to take, and there is nothing in the warrant this year, at least that was raised with us, on which the committee was asked to weigh in.
Great question. Thanks. On to policy review.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. We have, I will get to, we do have a first reading of proposed amendments to the bullying prevention policy, which I'll talk about in a second, but I did just want to give an update because we had a meeting and there's a lot going on at policy, but we won't necessarily be bringing a lot of it to the full committee for several months because it's all work on several different policy reviews at the same time, but I wanted to just give an update on a couple of those. I assume that this wasn't handled last week when I...
That's correct.
Okay. So the first thing is to say that we have successfully at least taken the first step towards having the policy manual that is available online through the website to be keyword searchable, which should facilitate anybody's attempts to find a policy that is relevant to the question they want to ask. This is a huge advance as we move into the 20th century, and at some point we hope to move into the 21st. With an even better system. So that was very exciting. And again, I want to really thank our IT staff, Ben Vivante in particular, for his help in getting that done. We did we have continued to discuss possible amendments on the student residency policy that we revised most of last year. But we had one piece which concerns properties that are intersected by the town line that needed to be clarified. We continue to clarify that. We are hoping to have on November 13th at the next at the policy subcommittee meeting, we are hoping to have a draft for the committee to vote on. that establishes a new policy for intersected properties and attendance in the public schools. We are going to have that with an aim towards having, the subcommittee will hold a public hearing on that policy because it does affect the whole town. There are very few properties actually that are intersected, but because this is about the right to attend the public schools, we thought it was important for the subcommittee to have a public hearing and get feedback. So the draft should be voted November 13th. The subcommittee will hold a public hearing on November 25th. We don't have a time yet. It's either going to be at 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock. And then we will, after that public hearing, if we have more to do on the draft as a result, we will do that and hope to be bringing that to the committee in December, to the full committee in December. We are also working on the, and we'll be working over the course of the year on the out-of-school time policies. Ms. Cox has done a preliminary review of the policy manual, looking for mentions of out-of-school time and out-of-school time programs. With the able assistance of Robin Coyne and our new searchable database. It appears that, to no one's surprise, there are multiple references to out-of-school time and the institutions that serve students in our buildings, but in affiliated but programs that are not necessarily run by the public schools of Brookline. There's a lot to consider, and we will continue to look at that and figure out how the policy manual needs to be revised, how those policies need to be revised. Again, Ms. Cox has taken the lead on that, and I could not be more pleased. We are also looking at social media. That's Mr. Chang is taking the lead on that. We are looking at, we are no longer looking at the policy on intellectual property because the superintendent has determined that the only changes needed are to procedures and communications. So that was taken off our list. And we will also be taking a look this year at graduation requirements, which we expect to look at later also in the spring, after the superintendent has had a chance to work with the headmaster on that. So, which brings us to the first reading of the amendments to the bullying policy. Here again, I apologize that you all didn't have this to look at ahead of time, and the draft in front of you is not necessarily the exact wording because the town council advises us that she has a few things still, but those would amount to tweaks rather than any kind of substantive change. So the draft in front of you, let me just explain. We did this full policy when the legislation came down on bullying and bullying prevention. There is no substantive change to that policy. Our procedures are all in place. Nothing is changing, but a new law was passed which required us to include references to adult staff who may be the focus of a bullying charge and then a bullying inquiry. And so all of the policy language that referred to students in the past needed to be updated to include adults, essentially. So in the draft you're looking at, almost all of the changes are highlighted in bold. There are a few that are not, and I will just take you through those. So just for example, so that people understand what we're talking about, in the definitions, the first definition is an aggressor. Again, the definition has not changed. It's just, it used to be an aggressor means a student who engages in bullying. Now it's an aggressor means a student or a member of school staff who engages in bullying. That is the nature of the change that we're doing in this policy. School staff includes, but is not limited to, educators, administrators, school nurses, cafeteria workers, custodians, bus drivers, athletic coaches, and advisors to extracurricular activity, as well as paraprofessionals, just to be clear that this is all adults and staff, and not just teaching staff. There is a new, under Section 3, there is a new section because delineating the part in Section 3, the prevention and intervention plan says the principal headmaster is responsible for the implementation and oversight of the plan within his or her school, except when a reported bullying incident involves the principal or the assistant principal as the alleged aggressor. In such cases, the superintendent or designee shall be responsible for investigating the report. In Section 5, again, looking at investigation of reports of bullying or retaliation, this is just providing for, in the cases where the headmaster or principal might be involved as an alleged perpetrator, or aggressor, I guess is the word we use, we have added to the list of people conducting investigations the school committee or superintendent or designee to cover all of our bases. Again, the school committee is there in the, I think, unlikely event that the superintendent at some point becomes a target of one of these, but if the superintendent did, the superintendent would not be able to. His direct reports, the principals and headmasters, would not be in a position. We are the superintendent's employer, and therefore it would fall to us to investigate the report. There is also, again, because training is important to the implementation of this law, in Section 7, under training and instruction on bullying prevention, that training will also now include engaging staff and those responsible for the implementation to distinguish between acceptable managerial behaviors designed to correct misconduct, instill accountability in the school setting, and bullying behaviors. That may become an important distinction. Publication and notice, again, just includes staff in the notice, and that, I believe, is the extent of the changes that we need to make. This is a first reading, so there is no vote to be taken. This is just to get your questions and feedback on those changes. Dr. Pini, did you want to add anything to that description?
Other than, as you said, Ms. Murphy will, I'm sure, give us some feedback on this. That's we dropped the ball on getting that to her ahead of time, or she would, as always, have had it prepared for you for tonight. This language did come from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, so we don't anticipate that there'll be major changes or possibly any changes at all. So this is what they've recommended as additions to, and I just want to add this because we're getting a lot of questions about this. It was said earlier, but this policy deals with potential adult-on-student bullying. There is no adult-on-adult bullying. The question we've been asked, and this gives me a chance to clarify, is that those kind of investigations occur under our harassment policies, which we have on the books, and we investigate through our Office of Human Resources. So this is about adult-on-student allegations of bullying.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Are there questions? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Stone. Clear as a bell.
Excellent. Our next meeting is the 13th at 8:30 a.m., and we will be taking up, we will not have to take this up, but we will move it to a second reading and a vote at our next available docket. We may take it up at the 13th if Town Council has anything to add or change. Thank you all.
Thank you. Override Study Committee, Mr. Chang, anything to report?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Override Study Committee met last evening, and the main purpose was to get a briefing on the B-Space report. A number of the school committee members were present, including Ms. Stone, Mr. Morris, Ms. Gatto, as well as Ms. Charlevsky and myself. And Rebecca Stone was the one that made the presentation and was doing with Mr. Morse and doing a outstanding job in answering some very pointed questions at times from the Override Study Committee. I think the main topics that really generated a lot of discussions included Metco, the Lynch location, as well as demographics. Obviously, all these things are being covered and studied by the 7 subcommittees that was formed for this purpose. But in addition to the school committee members, Chairwoman DeWitt was there and really provided good perspective with regards to the B-Space report. And I think we will have a lot of good questions and research that will be happening along the way for the Override Study Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Any questions for Mr. Chang? Okay. Any additional liaisons that should be covered? Ms. Cox.
I just wanted to let the committee know that on Tuesday, November 12th at 7:30 p.m., the Board of Selectmen will be holding a public hearing for comments in response to the Hancock Village 40B proposal. And it'll be the only opportunity for public comment prior to the Zoning Board of Appeals process. So will be held upstairs on Tuesday.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Lupini talked a little bit about that last week, I think, about the Hancock Village proposal, and I believe your staff's staying abreast of it through the planning department.
We are, thank you, yes.
Other questions for Ms. Cox? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. There are a number of people in the room who I suspect may not have signed in. Back there is a sign-up sheet, and I would ask everyone who is here who has not signed the sheet just to identify themselves that you were here, not necessarily for public comment, to do that, please. I know. While people are doing that, is there anyone who would like to make public comment at this time? Okay. Just a moment, please.
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Coyne, are there people signed up? Oh, they're signing the... For public comment or just to identify themselves? Oh, there's just one sheet. Okay. Sorry. Okay, we'll start. If you'd identify yourself, please, and also just let me tell you what the rules of the road are. You have about 5 minutes. We'd prefer if you kept it to 3. And there is unlikely to be any response by the school committee. This is just an opportunity for you to make your comments. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mary Galach, and I'm a Washington Square resident, and I'm a mother of 2 children in the Driscoll School, and I'm here on behalf of the Driscoll School Community Action Committee. First, I want to thank the members of the school committee for allowing the public comment period, and also thank you, Alan, for your response recently to our letter regarding concerns around the proposed Driscoll expansion. We understand that it will take time in the process for all of our questions to be answered, and we will keep asking them and looking for solutions together with you. Good planning starts early. There are 2 overriding concerns we have in implementing an expansion project. Number 1, to do what's best for the Driscoll School and for the Washington Square community. And 2, to do what's best for the town of Brookline. But in regards to parochial concerns, we know that much of the detail can be worked out in a feasibility process, but there are some activities that do not require the initiation of the MSBA process, things such as preliminary traffic studies, a study of the open space and parking needs, facilities audit, or capital needs assessment. These can be conducted by town staff, and we request that they proceed without undue delay. These documents would be referenced in the MSBA Statement of Intent, Priorities 5 and 7, which are in regards to facility improvements. If these materials are already available, please advise so we could review them. These studies will benefit the planning process and address what we see as major challenges and concerns, such as the following 6 points. Number one, how will the influx of an additional 150 to 200 students impact one of the busiest commuting corridors in town? 2, how will traffic flow, parking, and drop-off be accommodated in a vibrant but crowded commercial center of the town? 3, how will an expansion address school community and open space needs on a combined school and playground property that is the second smallest in town, barely as large as Runkle? 4, how can Brookline guarantee pedagogic excellence in K-8 models with school populations that are expanding to be among the largest schools in the state of any type, including high schools? 5, how will the budget properly allocate funding for the facilities improvements necessary for a proper renovation and not just an expansion? 6, it's been made clear to us that the MSBA funding is required for a building renovation, including the common spaces. An expansion-only plan is inequitable to this community in light of the attention given to the other school facilities renovated without expansion of the scale proposed here. How does the project change without MSBA funding? Are there temporary solutions preferable in that case? These are important questions for our community, and those solutions are possible if improperly addressed. They undermine the very viability of the project, the benefit to the school community, and benefit to the town. To focus on the benefit to the town for a moment, the MSBA SOI form asks, I quote, "Is this part of a larger facilities plan?" In all the previous applications, i.e. Devotion and Heath, the 2009 document by MGT of America has been referenced, which was a 10-year plan, and we are halfway through that. A Driscoll expansion is not part of this master plan as previously referenced. The B-Space study is inadequate as a master plan. We're grateful for the members of the Override Committee who are taking a look at and recognize that the MGT study, or document rather, used incorrect data in some places, and that the B-Space data was also flawed, and so are diligently reviewing some of that data and its conclusions. However, until that work is done, the town is proceeding on a flawed master plan at best, and at worst, no real master plan. Certainly not a master plan that reflects the current course. So our concerns are 3. 1, when will a master plan be revised? 2, how do we demonstrate competency to MSBA, who has demands from many other districts, without a revised master plan and with recent fund allocations that inadequately address the current crisis? And 3, K-8 school sizes greater than 700 students are extremely uncommon. They challenge the pedagogical model and quality of the academic environment. Yet the town has chosen to proceed with a plan to enlarge 5 of the K-8 facilities to sizes that push the boundaries of that model. What study has been done to guarantee that these sizes can maintain the level of excellence that we expect? What similar peer facilities have been studied to determine what changes may be necessary to the organizational structure or design of the building to ensure quality and a sense of community among the younger students? Is the supersized K-8 model really a benefit to the town? It seems the town is proceeding as rapidly as possible down a path with uncertain outcomes and very high costs based on some inaccurate data around demographics, costs, site areas, etc. We feel it's never too late to plan for a good outcome, and it's also not too late to prevent a bad one. And you can count on the Washington Square community to be there to continue this discussion with you. I thank you for your attention to our questions and concerns.
Thank you very much. Other public comment? Please.
My name is Tom Ned Powell, also Washington Square, also Driscoll School, in fact, right across the street from the entrance on Westbourne Terrace. Mary had mentioned in her comments the benefits of doing a capital needs assessment. That was offered in our letter to you all, and I wanted simply to underscore that. That is what I do professionally. For those of you who are not familiar with the capital needs assessment and plan, it understands what's physical condition of all the pieces and parts of a building: roof, walls, windows, heating, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, AC, and then the occupied spaces, lighting, carpets, fixtures, all of the equipment into the kitchen. Figuring out when do you need that work done, that's the physical condition. The second part is how much is it going to cost year to year to year? And the third, strategically, how are you going to deal with that? I do this routinely on all kinds of buildings, particularly housing. but have done schools, and I'm offering this at no cost to do this for Driscoll, and think that it should be done similarly and then updated and annually understood for each of the school buildings here, because you can't wait till something falls apart to fix it. You all know that better than I do, but I'm offering that, and we'll be happy to talk with whomever, whenever this might be useful and explain further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else for public comment? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is a little bit unusual, but there were some things raised in those comments that I think should not be left simply on the table. In particular, the questioning of the quality and accuracy of the data in the B-Space report. I know of no such challenge, especially from the Override Study Committee. I know they are looking at a number of the things in the B-Space report, but there is nothing about the data that was used that is untrue or inaccurate as was left there, and I just wanted to establish that the claim of inaccuracy is not the same as the existence of inaccuracy. Also, I just thought it might be useful for Mr. Rowe to talk about the process, since Mr. Lepsky is not here except remotely, to talk about the process that a project goes through, and when, and especially for maintenance purposes, how often we do reviews of our buildings, and how the process of a projected expansion and renovation and expansion how those things get addressed, just so that the timeline again is out there, because the suggestion is that we're not doing things in time for this, and I don't think that's true, and I think the public should hear what the process is.
Well said. Ms. Stone. Mr. Rowe, would you like to respond to the invitation?
Sure, I'd be glad to. The regular maintenance and repair of school buildings is handled by the Director of Town Buildings. As you know, we're jointly managed through the building support process of the town, so that the Director of Town Buildings is actually in charge of all school buildings and maintains the capital needs assessment of each of the buildings in an ongoing way. So from a regular repair and maintenance planning standpoint, that falls to the responsibility of the Director of Town Buildings, and we work closely with him. From the question of scheduling of projects, as you know from the process with Devotion School, we're now at a point where we're about to get a formal invitation to move forward with feasibility and schematics for the Devotion School. As we stand here and talk about other projects that would be out in the future, the process is that initially what we do is we work with the town in terms of the capital budget, so that as they look forward to FY15, money gets put aside for what would potentially be either a concept study or the process for schematics and feasibility. So that what we would expect is that the first thing is, as we look for a project that will come after the Devotion School, we would approach the Mass School Building Authority in a period that opens, we believe, next March or April, for us to present a statement of interest, which is the first point at which we approach the state for co-funding on a project. Once we do that, and at the time what we do is we talk about our need for addressing enrollment growth in the community. And it's really been based on the enrollment growth that we've experienced over the last few years that the state has participated with us. And so what happens is, so that the time frame for, let's say, if the Driscoll School project were to follow Devotion School, the time frame would be that we would approach them sometime next spring when the window is open, probably April, and prepare a statement of interest, which would be our first entree and statement that we'd be looking to do a project. We then wait to hear from them, but in the meantime, we get to make a decision whether there'll be some and what internal study will happen in the community that would be, as we've done for the high school and as we've done for the Devotion School, a concept study potentially where we look at the ramifications and the impact in the community of the building that we proposed. And then we're eventually invited to feasibility study, and we proceed with that, which gives us information on what the cost would be, and then we and so that the schedule moves out in multiple years as we look forward. So the actual action for a shovel in the ground, if we were to move forward on a project at the Driscoll School, is no closer than 3 to 4 years out. And there's a lot of planning and a lot of logistical issues that really get taken care of in the meantime. Is that the schedule you were thinking about?
Yeah, could you just, thank you, yes. The question of when we need critical information, I don't want to diminish to any extent how important the issues that were raised were about parking and about looking at the impact on the site. I'm just curious where in there, because I think the community is under the impression that if it isn't done now, it somehow won't be included in the plan for this project. And so if you could talk a little bit about where details like that belong in the process and when we can reasonably get that information so that it will be reflected in the plans as they develop.
Sure. That would be in the course of the next couple of years as we move through, as we move toward a feasibility study and really make pre-decisions whether we want to, what kind of internal concept review we might want to be. Issues of parking and impact on the neighborhood can be really reviewed at any time by Transportation Board with the Building Commission or driven by the school committee as we want to ask questions about impacts in neighborhoods of certain volumes of traffic, or look at patterns, or begin to talk about things like would we have a distributed parking plan for staff of a school as we currently do at a number of our schools. I believe Driscoll is not one of them at the current time. So that those are the kinds of questions that get reviewed and addressed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowe. Dr. Lupini, you have a report for us.
I do, thank you. So this is one of those one of our annual events when we are set to honor a number of our students who are this year's recipients, 2013 recipient of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents Certificates of Academic Excellence, representing their outstanding work at our high school. And we're very pleased to have a number of members of our high school staff here this evening to help us honor this year 3. You know, normally we do 2, but we had such outstanding students this year that I managed to twist some arms at MASS, and we have 3 recipients this year of our awards. So what we'll do is I'll ask each of their guidance counselors to come forward, who I think are going to share some words about them, and then we will present them with these certificates. So first we have Rich Gorman, who's with us tonight to present our first 2 students. Thank you for being here, Rich.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to introduce you to Riccardo and Stefano Magni, right over there. They came to Boston in 2008 after emigrating from Haiti and started up as BHS as freshmen in 2009. Their transition to a new country, culture, and school has come with many obstacles. The hurdles they have encountered because of this transition would be insurmountable to most. However, these challenges never impeded Stefano or Riccardo's approach and determination. Their heads have always been held high, a true sign of the strength that they walk with. People toss out words like perseverance and resiliency when describing young students, but few truly personify these words like Riccardo and Stefano. Through thick and thin, they have moved forward with a humble approach and demeanor worthy of everyone's respect and admiration. Mr. Carver, their wrestling coach and teacher at the high school, also wanted to share his remarks on the boys. He stated to me that Riccardo and Stefano's work ethic and desire to succeed was very clear from the start. They were motivated to achieve in sports and in their schoolwork. More importantly, they have never used their obstacles as excuses. They are contributors to Brookline High School, and BHS is better for having them. They are 2 kids that I care a lot about. And thank you, Mr. Carver, and a lot of the teachers here, as you mentioned, are here tonight on their behalf and Cheyenne's behalf, so I want to thank you guys for coming also. Stefano and Ricardo's contributions to Brookline have also extended beyond the walls of our school. This past summer, they worked as counselors in training at the Park School, helping to support and mentor younger children. Their supervisor, Mary Russell, from the Park School, is also here tonight. Just another example of the character they have and the relationships that they've forged with people at Brookline High School and beyond. As accomplished athletes and intelligent students in the classroom, Ricardo and Stefano will have no trouble pursuing both athletics and engineering at the collegiate level. Although there is no real way for me to do justice in their story in just one speech, I know that their past has been a huge motivational force behind the respectful approach that they have taken towards their school and their community. I know I can speak on behalf of a lot of people that, we're going to be sad to see you go next year, even though it's taken me 4 years to tell you guys apart. I can honestly say I wish I had more guys like you at the high school, so thank you.
So could I just ask all the people who have been involved with the two candidates here to stand up, the staff that's here supporting them, both from Park School and from Brookline High School. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. My name is Ricardo, and this is Stefano, and this is my mom, Mila Sherry, and my little brother is Nick Magni.
Stand up.
And thank you for everyone for coming here to support us. Thank you.
And thank you, Mom and Brother.
All right. So I think I'm asking Ray Feller, is that right? To come and recognize our third recipient. Thanks for coming, Ray.
Yeah, my honor. Unfortunately, Cheyenne's guidance counselor is ill. And I think you could probably go to most staff people in the building and ask them if they would like to present this to Cheyenne, because she's very beloved, so I'm honored to get to be the one to do it. Cheyenne, these are Ms. Young's words, Alexandra Young. Cheyenne is a remarkable young woman. She is a dedicated rower, a math and science enthusiast, and one of the most joyful students with whom I have worked. You should try walking down the hallway with Cheyenne. She knows everybody and has a huge smile, a wave, and often a super hard high five for everyone. She is smart, passionate, persistent, motivated, and above all, resilient. A few days before her sophomore year, Cheyenne's mom and sole caretaker passed away unexpectedly. For the next few months, Cheyenne found temporary placements in less than ideal living situations, including commuting to school for over 2.5 hours a day. Throughout the year, Cheyenne continued in her classes and on the crew team with resolve. During junior year, Cheyenne had an amazing turnaround and flourished in all facets of her life. Her positive attitude and determination are inspiring. We are so proud of Cheyenne for the person who she has become and love having her as part of the Brookline High School community. And Cheyenne, you know I feel that way too. I just want to say thank you to Ray Feller for that lovely introduction. And thanks for everyone who supported me throughout these years and came to see me receive this award, which I'm very honored to receive it today. Yeah, feels good. Anyway, thanks again.
So thank you to all the staff members who are here as well. That means a lot to have people come on the night of these awards, which are very meaningful to all of us and really represent why we're here. And you are more than welcome to stay for as long as you'd like through the rest of the meeting. But not required. But not required to stay. Right. Thank you for that. So you also have a written report that I provided for the committee. I would spend a little bit more time on the park issue here at the end, so I'll start with the second and third items here. We also, by the way, did have another item on here that I needed to remove that I'll just mention. We have scheduled a visit for the commissioner. He had to postpone it. It was going to be in December. It will now be rescheduled for January. And what we'll be doing as part of that, he'll be visiting 2 schools, and then we'll put together a panel discussion for him. He likes to do that, of some town leaders, school leaders, teachers, students. So we'll be doing that at one of the schools when he comes to visit. Should I start a sign-up list now? That'll probably be in January. And that was on in here, and we'll come back. We met, Dr. Fisher-Mueller and I met with the students who went to the MSAN Student Conference this year, which was held in Amherst. They've come back with a terrific action plan. I will say, as a theme, it involves them interacting with students and teachers, is really their theme. They want to be in elementary schools talking about some of the things that they've learned and some of the things that they're trying to put in place. They want to interact with high school and middle-level teachers and elementary teachers around some of the things that they've learned and experienced in their school career. So it's a terrific plan that they've started to work on, and they will be with you on December 5th so that you can hear about their plans. Next week, in our second of our Leadership Academy sessions, we're very excited to be discussing the Understanding Brookline report with our principals and vice principals. We're lucky enough, because of Jenny Amory's efforts. Jenny Amory at the Brookline Community Foundation has set up so that we have the 3 main drivers of that report. David Wood, Ashley Mason, Linda Pelkey are all coming to meet with the principals and talk with them about the kinds of things principals are experiencing that resonated for them in the report. And so we're really anticipating a terrific 2-hour session next Friday morning with that group. And I really want to thank Jenny for putting that together, and also thank Dr. Allen, who continues to be our point person on this effort, along with a few of our principals. Dr. Fisher-Mueller and I went to a session last week on the PARC implementation. PARC, you will recall, is I'm not going to get what PARC stands for here, but PARC is the anticipated replacement for our MCAS assessments. It's an 18-state consortium that Massachusetts is part of, and it's a 3-year phase-in process that Massachusetts has proposed. Year 1 is a field test for certain grade levels in certain schools, certain numbers of classes in those grade levels, to take place in 2013. In 2014, districts will choose, are we doing PARC or are we doing MCAS? And then the state board will vote as to whether Massachusetts is going to become one of the participants in PARC on a permanent basis. I want to share some things out of that session. Some here in this list, I think, a little more meaningful than others. We began down the road in Massachusetts to PARC when we signed the Memorandum of Agreement as part of our waiver request in 2010, saying that we would go to PARC provided that the assessments are at least as comprehensive and rigorous as the current MCAS assessments, if not more so. They claim that PARC is creating new
extraordinary partnership with higher education by having higher ed faculty involved in the development. The new assessments are based on the Common Core, which Massachusetts aligned to beginning in 2010. This is in quotes because it came from Bob Bickerton from the department, that all indications to date are that Park will provide a better assessment system than MCAS. I asked what better meant, but didn't get a great answer to date. Park will be field tested in 2014. 15% of the students in the state and 70% of the schools will participate. We have every school right now except for one, that's Brookline High School. Based on what they're telling us about the second round of assignments, I fully anticipate that we will end up with at least one assessment at the high school, and therefore all of our schools would be involved. Those students participating in a performance-based assessment through Park can be exempted from the corresponding MCAS. I've spent a lot of time at the first two forums that I've done talking to parents about why I'm leaning toward exempting students. This, however, does cause problems with the school and district accountability system, and DESE has been responsive in proposing some models to deal with that issue of the accountability system. I told you that districts can choose Park or MCAS in 14-15. There will be no accountability system, therefore, in 14-15 for districts that choose Park. We will be held harmless at whatever the determination was from the year before. Park will be offered in computer-based and paper pencil assessments, at least for the time being. We know that'll happen in 14 and 15 and 16. We don't know beyond that. The board will make a determination after the 14-15 assessment. Massachusetts will continue to have a science, technology, and engineering MCAS. There are no plans around a Park or Smarter Balance, which is the other consortia. There are no plans for a science assessment in either of those groups. They went through a lengthy process of how the competency determination would be determined for kids for graduation. If you think about this and plot it out, you'll see why they've said that the MCAS will need to remain in place at least through 2018 for kids needing a competency determination, because you can't start out with a competency determination on one assessment. If you don't pass it, switch to another assessment for the makeup. It doesn't work, so they're going to have to keep making MCAS assessments at least through 2018 to get those kids to graduation. One of the main issues that was discussed at this session is that there is a serious disconnect between the implementation plan for Park and the educator evaluation system. You will recall that student growth scores are part of teacher evaluations down the road, beginning theoretically next year. The problem is that we're switching assessments in the middle of that implementation process. So let me just say that superintendents, assistant superintendents, union presidents, I hope I'm speaking for the union president, have serious doubts about the ability of the state to correlate those two scores and implement a system that is seamless and that would be used for teacher evaluation. So a serious disconnect. And lastly, and this is the issue I guess I've become known for at these sessions, Massachusetts has a set of standards regarding accommodations for students. One of those accommodations is that all of our MCAS tests are untimed. Park has not adopted that measure, that standard. Park, to be fair, the Park board would say to you that they have adopted a time on each test that is 150% of what they believe the test requires for most students to complete, and that if a student's IEP states that they get an untimed test, they get an untimed Park. My perspective is that that's not enough. My perspective is that Massachusetts got it right 10 years ago when they decided that all tests would be untimed and that they would not require a student to have something in a legal document giving them that untimed nature. It's
unfair on a number of different levels. The chief for me is that kids with untimed natures in their IEPs will simply not take the time if they see other people finishing and leaving before that. In other words, the test is up for everyone except you. You can stay as long as you'd like. That's not how it works. That's not how kids behave. And as I've told the Department of Ed at every one of these sessions, I have a 16-year-old who I can bring and have talk to you to prove it, if you'd like, who's now through with all these assessments. But this is a major issue for me in our district and statewide. I've told the commissioner that I'm not certain I will recommend to this board that we adhere to that standard when that time comes. I feel that strongly about that particular accommodation. And so I'm weighing that, where we'll go with them. I've asked them to go back to the park board again and ask them to reconsider that stance. And I will keep you informed as I hear more on that. Where that really hits the road for me is when this test starts to count, when all students are taking it 2 years from now. So we learned a lot at this assessment. There's a lot of work yet to be done. Again, for me, it's the accommodation issues and the educator evaluation issues where there are major disconnects right now. So I'd be glad to answer any questions on the report.
Questions for Dr. Lupini? Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Lupini. Just because I was looking at the website earlier, it is the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, which was news to me.
I like smarter balance, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. Smart balance. The word smart is in it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Anyway, so, but my question is actually about two things, and you probably don't have the answers to them because I'm not sure they've been discussed. But from your description, the new testing based on PARC is still a high-stakes test.
The 10th grade test will still be a high-stakes test.
And it'll still be a 10th grade test. So
it will still be a 10th grade test.
Okay. So has there been any discussion of the possibility of the required school completion age being raised to 18, which is a current policy debate in the legislature here and elsewhere, and how that would affect whether or not the high-stakes nature of the test would happen again in 10th grade? Is there any discussion of those two things intersecting?
No, in fact, at the MASC conference I was just at, we were briefed on where the raise of the compulsory attendance discussions are, and it seems that there's a good chance that we're going to see something in the near future. You know how that legislative process works. But there was no discussion of how these two things intersect.
It would be interesting if you would raise that as a question.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Ms. Cox.
I appreciate your support of untimed nature of assessments, and I hope you'll continue to push that. And I do wonder what's animating their insistence otherwise.
Well, can I just answer that part real quick?
Sure.
So the answer, because I raised this at every session, starting with a panel I was on with the commissioner last summer and up and through this session. This is the nature of an 18-state consortia, right? Massachusetts does not control this discussion. And we were told, we have two very good people who did this session, and who, by the way, I understand are doing some sessions through MASC, Bob Bickerton, who's terrific, and Maureen LaCroix, former superintendent in Bedford. They're terrific, and they do a great job with this presentation. But Bob was very candid in saying that there are certain states within the consortia who do not believe in the untimed nature and are blocking it. And of course, for these states, for these tests to be scored among the states, right, they all have to operate under the same set of conditions. And so the short answer is that it's a number of states within the group who are essentially blocking this. Every other, Bob told us, I believe, on the 31st, that every other Massachusetts accommodation has been adopted. Every other accommodation that Massachusetts has used has been adopted except this one.
That doesn't sound very hopeful then. So my other question is just, and I don't know if you know this offhand, but is there any difference in the amount of testing time between PARC and MCAS? Will there be any reduction in the overall number of
Sessions?
sessions?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. We haven't strictly correlated that yet because we simply don't know right now the number of sessions when the test goes live, if you will. We're doing a field test. We know how many field test sessions we're being asked to do, for example, with a class of fourth graders. I think it's 3 if it's in English language arts, I think. Remember that this gets a little muddy because we're not only talking about these performance-based assessments, which are the assessment that takes the place of MCAS, but also the possibility of the end-of-the-year assessments, which occur later, early in June, late in May. So my guess would be, just from simple math, that we're actually increasing on some level the number of sessions, although I can't speak, I can't certify that, if you will. But it's certainly no less.
Ms. Stone?
I'm sorry, I just remembered there was a terrific question asked of you at the Runkle School about some of this, and I thought it bore repeating. The question is that you mentioned that that the implementation creates a year, maybe more than 1 year, when our accountability to the state standards and the ability to compare across years becomes very difficult, right? And that we won't be getting those reports. So in those years where we are making, let's just assume that this is going to happen and be implemented and that MCAS will be replaced. You had a good answer to parents who were worried that parents and the schools that their kids attended would not be getting adequate feedback on their child's performance in those years when we're making that transition. And I just thought it would be great to talk a little bit about how else we think within Brookline about the assessment of students,
Sure.
their progress, and how we're going to stay on top of that.
Sure,
even
thanks for
during
that.
transition.
So just to back up for a second, what that actually looks like is, let's just take one particular class at some school. Let's take a 3rd grade at the Lincoln School, where we've been told that 2 of the 4 sections will participate in the field test, right? So we'll have a set of protocols by which that we must use to select the 2 classes. And I'm told they're very specific, and they will help us create a decision that can't really be questioned, right? It won't be a matter of some choice between the classes, and this class has more students with these characteristics or whatever, that it's it'll be very helpful to us. So those students, remember, because if I choose to follow through with the not having the students take the MCAS, they will not receive a report. Let's say it's in English language arts. They will not receive an English language arts report for 13, right? But the other 2 classes will. So there's a formula the department's coming up with to help figure out what that means to the school's overall accountability rating. But the parents won't receive a report on that MCAS. They also won't receive a report, and nor would anyone in the school, in the following year if we choose, and I don't know why we wouldn't, to utilize PARC instead of MCAS, right? So that year our overall accountability score will be frozen, but you wouldn't get a report. And some people have suggested that means 2 years in a row without that information. And that's true. But I've said regularly that's 1 data point, right? In 2 consecutive years, it's 1 data point. But we're building an assessment system where hopefully, through a number of things that we're providing parents with, right through the discussions that we've had about the conference forms that we're now utilizing, which provide a ton more information on the specifics of students' performance against a set of standards, along with teachers using conferences to explain what that means, examples of work. Hopefully, we're able, through our own assessment system, to provide much richer data than this one sort of test at one particular time. And as we build that, that one data point becomes one data point. And by the way, I don't think the best of the data that we're able to provide parents with around performance. So those 2 years will be key for us in building that system and testing out whether we are providing parents and students with the kind of information that's valuable to them. Welcome.
Other questions? Permit me to ask a question, Dr. Lupini. You, if I remember correctly, which is subject to question, you indicated that the test will be given in some cases with the use of technology and in other cases without the use of technology. Is that correct?
So in 2013, in each of those pilot situations, field test situations, excuse me, we've been told this grade level at this school will take the assessment paper pencil. This grade level at this school will take the assessment using technology. And so right now we're putting those conditions in place at each of those schools to make sure that we can do the testing in that manner. In 2015, if we choose to do Park as a district, then we will have a set of choices, a set of options around that. I would hope that we are capable, whether we make that decision or not is another issue, I would hope that we are capable of doing the assessments via technology across the district in 2015. That's my hope. And they're telling us that the paper pencil option will continue for some period of time down the road. But these assessments, both the Smarter Balance assessments and the Park assessments, are clearly technology-based assessments. And as we've discussed, and we can show you examples of, and you can see for yourself, if you go to the website and look at the sample questions, I mean, you'll see what Dr. Fisher-Mueller is talking about when she says that she believes, and I absolutely agree with her, that the online assessments are testing not only mathematics, for example, but also a set of technology skills. And I'm not sure how careful the test developers have been about that. I mean, we use the example, I think you've heard this before, forgive me if you have, we use the example of an English language arts assessment where students read a paragraph, and then the question is, drag and drop something that represents this. Well, drag and drop is a skill, and by the way, just because my child is really good with that cell phone doesn't mean they understand the concept of drag and drop, right? But there are some assumptions being made here about students' technology skills, their skill set, in answering those questions that some of us worry about, and that I think we'll see as we start to field test. Hopefully, those are the kinds of things that we're paying attention to, that the consortium is paying attention to as we field test as well. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I thought people would be interested in that aspect. Oh, okay. Ms. Scotto. I won't forget you, Mr. Chang.
This is just a follow-up on that question. If students are from homes where technology isn't present in the home for whatever reason and have had less exposure, even though we're teaching it in the school, it seems to me it makes it a much less fair test. Because
yeah, I think I think the point of your question is that we're introducing another element,
absolutely.
right? We're introducing another element, and yes, it does. It does all of that, and I don't think there's been enough experience in either of these consortia. And again, Park is the one we're dealing with. I don't think there's been enough experience there in dealing with exactly what that means and how much impact that has on a student's ability to answer certain questions or do certain concepts. I don't think we know.
Right. It would seem, but it would seem to me that if you were in a home that could not afford the technology, that is right at the outset. It says it's not a fair test.
Right. Right. And what we do in terms of that with paper pencil are issues for us to determine between now and 15. let me be clear, for 14, it's not a choice. For 14, if we've been told, I'll keep picking on Lincoln if you don't mind, if we've been told in that 4th grade class at Lincoln School that the 2 sections that are going to participate in the test are technology, then they're technology. If we've been told that the 1 class at devotion in 5th grade is paper pencil, then it's paper pencil. I mean, where this gets really ironic, I don't know if I've told you this, but Burlington is one of the leaders in pad technology with students. Burlington Public Schools, all of their assignments for the field test were paper pencil, which Eric Conti, the superintendent, found rather interesting. And they've since modified that. Thought they'd be a good place to actually get some feedback on the technology-based assessments. Wise choice, I think.
Mr. Chang.
Coming back to the time issue, is the park consortium open to feedback once it's being field tested? So I guess my question is, of the, 18 states, are they all testing park for the first time this coming year?
Yes, I believe so. And yes, I believe we have if this answers your question, I believe we have a long way to go until we actually have a final set of agreements on the accommodations.
I would think.
At least I hope so.
Right. Well, I would think that if everybody's field testing this and the feedback is that timing is not a good thing, there should be reconsideration about that.
No, and let me just hit on one other point, if you don't mind, off of that. I mean, there are some really cool things going on here as well in Park. It's not going to be available this year for the field test, but I saw at least under partial development, they're going to be able to take the conditions of a student's IEP, the accommodations that are in place, and build them into that student's test. So I'm that student, and I have accommodation A, B, C around enlarged text or whatever, and I log in to take the test, and the test will come up with my accommodations. I mean, that's cool. There are some really interesting things. They aren't ready yet, but I've seen some demos of them. And if they're able to do those kinds of things, those are terrific for students and certainly in the best interest of our kids. And I can tell you in the case of my daughter, running around to get enlarged text of tests and whatever, probably the people at Beverly High School are not really excited about that on a yearly basis. But if that's part of her login, those things become available. Or if she needs someone to read to her and a reader automatically pops up and reads these. I mean, that's pretty interesting stuff. So long way to go on that yet, though.
Ms. Stone, I gather you'd like to say something else.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the expression on my face as I was looking at Dr. Lupini was all of our investments in technology-based anything are in an atmosphere being absorbed right now in an atmosphere where a very large technology-based initiative was launched by government recently and has been getting somewhat bad reviews in terms of the technology's actual ability to be responsive to
I've heard that.
needs of the program. And so as we look forward to these amazing technology-based improvements in testing, I think we ought to just take it with a grain of salt that it all depends on who develops the program.
I agree.
Okay, I think I'd like to move on
Thanks.
to the next item. And Dr. Lupini, you're the lucky person to handle this as well. It has
Well, thanks
to do,
so much.
Yes, my pleasure.
So you have the recommended for first reading draft of our 14-15 calendar. We really sought this year, as I told you last meeting, to get this to you in a fashion that would allow us to get it to parents early in the year, preferably before the end of the calendar year, so that they could plan accordingly. I did tell you at our last meeting that we had requested of the BEU a starting date for teachers that would have been August 27th and 28th and would have allowed students to start on the 2nd of September and therefore would have concluded the school year without any weather-related closings on June 16th. They did not go along with that request, and so therefore, within the parameters defined in the collective bargaining agreement, I cannot propose a school start prior to September 1st. So we are instead proposing that students will begin on September 2nd and 3rd. Teachers will begin on September 2nd and 3rd, students on the 4th, and the school year without any weather-related closings will end on June 18th. We are using present collective bargaining language in the setting of all other conditions for this calendar, and that includes the collaborative time and our release days. So that's where the recommendations that you're seeing on here are coming from. So again, this is meant to be a first reading. I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
So there's no vote on this tonight, but you're welcome to ask whatever questions you or I would like. Are there questions? Ms. Stone?
Dr. Lupini, do you need to get water?
I'm good, thank you.
That wasn't my question, though, Mr. Chairman.
I assume that.
Although I will confess, I have been very frustrated over the last couple of years with the sort of dance that we've played each year in trying to negotiate a start date that works for everybody, including the end of the year. In this case, this year, last year was really particularly difficult because we ended so late. This calendar looks like a fairly normal projected end date, even with a start on the 4th, because we didn't have to accommodate the days of low attendance early in the days, right? So this is actually not as bad a calendar as, for example, that we had to deal with this year. Is that?
That's absolutely correct.
We are dealing with this year.
Yes.
Okay.
When you say
Typical. Sorry.
yes. No, I'll say, because we've done the work of looking at other calendars. It's a typical Brookline calendar. It's no longer typical of the Metro West. Even in a year like next year, when Labor Day is as early as it is, the majority of those districts are starting with teachers, some with students, pre-Labor Day. So that's right. It's a typical Brookline calendar, but no longer typical of the Metro West.
Well, I might just comment on that, since I've had some experience this past year, that in the event that there are a couple of snow days and the end of school goes into the last full week of June, my guess is, I know that there are some high school students who will be acting as counselors at camp, who will have to go to camp a week or so before camp begins, and that will mean the last week in June, so it will be awkward for them.
Well, there are also students who go, the campers themselves, yes, who actually go. Yeah, the last week of June is to be avoided. We've learned that we've experienced it time and time again. I'm not sure we've yet learned it.
Right. Okay. No questions. We will proceed with Ms. Kershaw, who's going to tell us about the results of the first quarter financial situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will do my best, and Mr. Rowe chose a good time to leave the room. See? So at the Finance Subcommittee meeting on Monday, we discussed the results of the first quarter financial report, which is effectively projections annualized over the full year for where our current spending is. And we do actually have some good news, which is different than where we were at this time last year. So primarily due to savings within salary accounts, so there were some non-renewals and some retirements at higher rates than we expected. And we have also maintained some of the cost controls, particularly in special education. So I'm very happy to report, and we discussed at the Finance Subcommittee, that at this point we're projecting a surplus of about $406,000, which is terrific because at this time last year we were looking down the barrel of a very large deficit, and to have that as early in the year as we had it last year. So I want to recognize the administration for their efforts, and just say we're in much better shape going into this, which is not to say we don't have plenty to worry about. So we are obviously seeing continued increasing enrollment, and with kindergarten enrollment this year coming in at 630, that's putting pressure on our budget throughout. I'm all right. So far. Those are the primary highlights of the first quarter report as we discussed at the Finance Committee. I'm just giving the highlights and ready to move on to the budget transfers. Are there questions about the first quarter report? As I said, most of the savings we experienced were in the salary account, a very minor amount of savings in supplies, and a few other areas, but really predominantly in salary. And I think it puts us in a good position going into the next quarter. Questions for myself?
Ms. Stone?
Curious
So when
tonight.
we,
She's curious.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
How
Ms.
unusual.
Kershaw, I'm so curious tonight. So when we, I think we talked about this at the Finance Subcommittee, but when we completed the budget, voted the budget for this year, we were drawing down our one-time funds significantly. I know there was a lot of concern both on this committee and at the advisory committee that our contingencies were very, very low going into this year. And I wondered whether that projected, whether you could explain what happens, what do we do with a projected surplus? Does that essentially give us back the kind of contingency that we usually try to have?
Yes, that's exactly what it does. Now, if you look at the budget and you look at what's funding it, $650,000 of what's funding our current operation was to come from other revenue, which is really that one-time revenue. So what this means is that we're spending on a level that essentially puts two-thirds of that back in our pocket, meaning we're approaching spending at the sustainable budget level, which would be a very good position to find ourselves in, because we not only have to worry about where we are this year, but we have to worry about all the implications for next year. So the closer we can get to a point where we can minimize the amount of what we call one-time revenue, where really going back to the sustainable budget would be really to our advantage. Right. I apologize. I had just walked downstairs. But did you point out the significant change in our special education?
No, because I know it's not included here, but please do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what's really important as we look at the pattern that we're seeing this year is the other piece in this that's important is the change that we've seen in the number of students that we've been able to bring back from private placements. The number that we reported in the first quarter is 69 students. And when you look back for the last few years and see that the number was in the 80s, that's really a significant difference. And while the expenditure amount is not proportionally down, part of the reason is because we're carrying a provision for growth that may happen between now and the end of the year. So continuous management of this, if our Student Services Department is successful in working with families to make sure that we retain these students in in-house programs, which we've built over the last couple of years, will really help us budgetarily, as well as being what we believe is the right model to keep students in district programs.
So I'll just add to that because I think it's a pretty good example of the kind of thing that we discussed on Monday at the Finance Committee and have been discussing as, you know, in a time of enrollment growth as we have, with sort of stagnant revenues, I think the tendency is to sort of hunker down and just try and, you know, whittle away at different pieces or try and do it across the board. And I think these are examples of how we've made really wise, targeted investments in new programs that on one side of the balance sheet might have seemed like we were spending additional money, but the result, both economically and financially for the budget, and then obviously educationally for those kids and families who get to now stay in Brookline instead of being in out-of-district placements, is exactly the kind of financial strategy and programmatic strategy that we are going to have to continue to find and pursue as we're dealing with additional enrollment growth and a changing landscape about what's needed. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm sorry I overlooked it.
Mr. Chang.
Obviously, this is a tremendous swing, and kudos to management and administration in terms of managing this. But I think the 15 in decline in terms of outplacement, a number of them are age outs. Is that correct?
A number are age out, but in that number there are 8 or 9, I believe, Dr. Schmuckler, is that right, of students who've returned to in-district programs. So the lion's share of it is actually students coming back to our programs. Every year we have age outs, and we did this year. And the proportionally or comparatively to the other years in the last few, that wasn't out of line. So, every year we have students who move, students who age out, others who move to the community. So there's that, normal churn, if you will.
Right.
The really unusual pattern this year was the success of the department in bringing students back, working with families to show them the new programs that had been grown, introducing them to those programs and convincing them that they'd be a successful placement for students.
I mean, realistically, in terms of looking forward in the next 2 or 3 years, how many additional students do you think you could bring back into the school system? Because at some point in time, you're going to hit a point where you can't go any lower.
Sure. I don't have that number, and that's something that I think Dr. Schmuckler will attempt to look at as we, move through the year. I don't think we're.
A crystal ball.
Yeah, I don't think we can pick a number and say, we're going to have a goal of X per year. I think what happens is as the program staff look at the profile of the students and the placements they're in, they work to try and see whether there's a match between an in-house program and the opportunity to bring a student back. And I think the even more important piece is making sure that students who might otherwise be placed out are retained.
I think that
Can I just comment? Can I just add one piece of that? So the piece I want to that's exactly right. And so what the other piece that we are doing is looking at our trends. What kind of schools are our out-of-district placements ending up at? What does that say about, we've taken you through a couple of these over the last couple of years as we've analyzed a particular program or a particular profile where we were interested in building a program because A, we thought it was a good fit for a particular school, B, we thought there were some number of students who actually belonged in school here rather than in school X. And then could we build a program that would help us retain future kids who were already in our district-wide programs or whatever. So more than a number, it's that strategy. Right? So that's a strategy that we believe works.
Yeah.
Is to continue to analyze where those spots are, where we can create something that works, or where we can partner with an EDCO or a private school or whatever in building a program that would retain students here.
I think what's even more important is especially students who's come back and the parents sees that this is a terrific, obviously, transition for them because now they're in, Brookline schools. They could be tremendous advocates for other parents, that may have students in outplacement and use them as a real resource.
So I want to say this about Dr. Schmuckler's work and about Ms. Orloff's work, Mr. Henry's work at the high school, the teachers in those programs. Where we've always had that advantage, more so than in other situations, is at the high school. But quite frankly, as we've discussed, the programming up till the last number of years, we had more kids going out than we had coming in, and we had some of the largest numbers in the district were transitioning out at high school grades, not elementary grades. When we have this, because we know we see in the other data, right? We see this advantage. Brookline High School is one of the high schools, as told in the MGT report, that actually experiences an uptick between 8th and 9th grade. People want their students there. So why this mismatch between what was happening with our overall student population and special education. And it really had to do with the kinds of programs that were there. So it was a great opportunity in terms of building some programs there. So a lot of these numbers that you're seeing turn around are happening at the high school through their work, right? So we have that advantage there, and we're maximizing it.
The other, I'm going to skip the one on AIDS. What this shows is that our pattern of as you know, we've grown. While we've grown some aides, our pattern of having an aide in every kindergarten and first grade has, even though we've gone through that pattern, we see ourselves still with projected staffing for aides this year, essentially equivalent to where we were back in fiscal '08. And so part of what our thrust during this period of time was to use that program model of having aides serving in classrooms working with teachers as opposed to the model that had been growing through the years of one-on-one situations. And so we believe it's a better program model. And it appears to be successful when we look at the staffing counts. The other piece that's important to remember is during that period of time, the significant growth we've had, especially at kindergarten and first grade. So these are our current enrollments at KN1. The point of this slide is really to show the significant difference between the average class, the average cohort size of our lowest 5 classes at 624 and our smallest 5 classes at the top end. And this really shows the difference of 160, 170 students on average per cohort. This is the problem we face, the pressure as these students move forward each year with the question mark of what will the incoming kindergarten population look like. We just don't have any data that would indicate to us that that number is going to be below 600. And so as 600 students move in the low end and numbers in the low 400s move out over the next few years, we're going to see growth happen both for the total school system and then significantly for the high school over the next few years. So this is the challenge that we face. One of the conversations we've been having about it is trying to maintain a quality average class size. This year, we're just over 21 students per class at each of the average on our K-8 sections. And what you see is that from a frequency standpoint, the most frequent class size at the elementary level is 22. We have 50 occurrences of 22 students per class. And when you look at where we were in '05 and where we are today, the curve that you put over the blue charts, it has shifted significantly to the right, where what we see is a higher. This reflects the higher average class size that we move to. So while we still have a favorable class size, and we've tried to manage that, it's still significantly up from where we were in a decade ago. Finally, if the chair weren't in the way, I'd show you that there were 5,228 students in our K-8 schools. That's okay. No, it's not. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. And so what this shows is that we've grown over this 9-year period 1,342 students. That's 35% growth from where we were in '05 to where we are today. So that shows you both the capacity issues we faced and how it's complicated our budget issues, which will actually lead into the presentation that the superintendent's going to be talking about next, which is why there's so much pressure on our infrastructure, and that's infrastructure of both facilities and staff, because it's been very difficult to keep up with the demand. And finally, I'm not going to show you that slide. That just shows you our pattern of spending over the last few years. And there's a little too much detail, but I think the good news is that we're projecting that we'll come in certainly well within our budget for this year. And so that, as Ms. Kershaw was saying at the top, really is important for us as we try and manage our way back to a sustainable budget level for FY14.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you.
I have one more item of committee business.
Yes, madam, I'm aware.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up.
At the Finance Subcommittee, the committee took action to approve a set of budget transfers based on the projections in the first quarter report. Effectively, it's allocating predominantly $750,000 from the step and lane reserves for staff into the appropriate locations across the general fund, so into the right areas for us to use those funds. The committee voted favorably, and I would like to make a motion for the committee to consider approving the budget transfers as presented in the November 1st memo and in the handout that you have entitled FY14 Budget Transfers, First Quarter Adjustments. I'll entertain a second.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. I assume that was for a second. Great.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments? We've also been over this in the Finance Committee. Not hearing any. All those in favor of the...
roll call.
Oh, Helen, I forgot. Helen, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, just checking.
Listening intently.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Coyne.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. For those who may have come in late, we have, as you can tell, someone participating in the meeting remotely. When that happens, the law is that all of our votes have to be roll call votes. Dr. Lupini,
Mr. Morris,
you have something to say to us tonight.
a few things.
Yes.
So, thanks for this. We, over the course of the last few weeks, and in particular the last week, have been, as advertised, I guess, talking about the challenges related to our enrollment growth, and in preparation for a presentation for the Override Study Committee next Wednesday evening. Meeting's now scheduled, by the way, for 7 o'clock, not 6 o'clock for next Wednesday, for those interested. We've been putting this piece together to take a look at what we've been talking about here for a long time, right? The areas where we've not been able to keep up during the last number of budgets because of our enrollment growth, the future projections of student enrollment and what we believe that will dictate in terms of additional classroom needs, the other services that surround those pieces, classroom supplies, professional development, those kinds of areas which have been largely frozen or reduced over these budgets over the last number of years, while we've been very clear, we've committed resources to the classroom. And you saw it in the slide that Mr. Rowe showed around our class sizes. That's happened. But there are many, many other areas, including administration. So what I'm going to take you through tonight, and then Mr. Rowe is going to give you a few specific examples of the work that we're doing in preparation for next Wednesday, and that we will spend 2 hours with principals on tomorrow morning, is our current thinking about the assumptions that support the projections that we're going to put forward. Now, another important piece that we would have liked to have done tonight, but we're just not there, that will be included in the override discussion for next week, is what we think this vision for technology, what a classroom looks like in what we're proposing, what the opportunities are that we'd like to be able to provide for teachers and students through the technology in their classroom environments, including, I will say, a proposal to begin with what we're calling a bring your own device. Some people call it a one-to-one, but there are different versions of that starting at the high school in the next few years. So we'll lay that out for you next Thursday. That'll be a piece of what we also talk about next Wednesday night as well. So all of these presentations really need to start with these two slides that we built into the first presentation to the Override Study Committee, because most of what I've heard in those discussions so far have really been about our core values. They're sometimes characterized as efficiencies,
And I said very clearly the first time that we presented to them that they are no such thing. They are changes in the core values of this system. You can talk about wanting to change a materials fee program. You can talk about wanting to change the METCO program. You can talk about wanting to modify the tutorial 4+1, the way we do extended day, the various programs that we have under educational equity, but do not call them efficiencies. They are changes in program. They will change the nature. As you've heard me say probably way too many times, you do certain things to our materials fee program as it impacts teachers, and you will impact our ability to attract and retain. We know that from the anecdotal evidence that we have from our staff. Each one of these has costs behind it. It is part of our core values. We've actually taken them, as you see here and you've seen before, and categorized them under our core values and tried to show that they are part and parcel of what this school system is. And then we talked about some of those policy choices and cost drivers. We certainly believe there is something to be discussed in terms of METCO. We believe it will happen part of it will happen in January, right, when you sit down with our legislators and we talk about the fact that METCO funding should equal what's put into school choice at a minimum. And I'm not sure we'd be having some of the conversations that we're having if the state was meeting that obligation, which they are not. So each of these costs money. I mean, Mr. Rowe just took you through the last one in the first column, right? A number of years ago, when we were talking about ERA funds, we committed to two things, right? Team facilitation and K-1 paraprofessionals, right? And I would contend that the data show that both of those are working very well. Thank you very much. They are having great impact on both the level of service that we're able to provide for students and their families, and they're also minimizing our costs. They're helping us reduce costs in those areas. But they meant a commitment of funds, pretty significant commitment of funds. When we blew up the model that had 26 different people chairing team meetings at our elementary level, 26 people, and went to essentially 8 people across those schools, that was a significant financial investment that's worked very well. So these are policy choices, they're cost drivers, they're important to who we are. So let me go through these programmatic assumptions and then get to a couple of examples. Some of these you've seen because we talked about them briefly in that finance meeting, and we hope we've been able to do a little bit more with them here. So these are the assumptions we've used in building this. So all these projections assume that our current program and policy decisions stay in place. Now, you saw many of them on those first 2 slides. Ones that aren't as obvious is we have class size guide. Well, class size was on there. We have class size guidelines that we utilize. We've assumed an adherence to those class size guidelines that we've utilized over the last number of years. We've not assumed an increase in class size. We've also assumed, Ms. Charlevsky was kind enough to point this one out on Monday, we have a policy that asks me yearly to go back and review with the high school administration the numbers of students taking each class. And when there are certain numbers that fall below a certain number, particularly in some electives, we don't not necessarily drop those classes. We have a conversation about why we're running that class with a number below that number. Now, that's led to us over the last number of years looking at some classes that we ran yearly and making a decision to run them every other year instead. And instead of opening just to seniors, they're now open to juniors and seniors because of the every other year nature. That's an efficiency, right? That's an efficiency that's very difficult to quantify, but it's a different way of looking at it, and it was driven by your policy. So we've assumed that we continue to use those policy decisions and that we continue to adhere to our vision, mission, core values, and goals. In terms of enrollment, as Mr. Rowe stated earlier, we don't have, people have said to us, these trends aren't going to continue. We don't have numbers that suggest that. So we've used a projection of 630 incoming kindergartners for FY15 through FY19, and then 600 kindergartners from FY20 through FY22. By the way, these projections take us out through FY22. That's the model that we've built for that discussion next week. And the reason for 2022 is because that's how far out we've gone on that high school model that shows us with almost 2,500 students. So this next assumption is an interesting one. We've assumed no consolidations and no growth in sections outside of kindergarten. We did this because we've looked at our data, and we have consolidated classes over the last 5 years. We've also grown sections, and essentially they balance out. So for this exercise, it made sense to just assume that it will continue to balance out, right? And that there won't be a need to add sections in a 5th grade, consolidate sections in some other grade, that they essentially balance out. We've used the same kinds of assumptions that we use in our budget, in our regular budget discussions, that all professional teaching equivalent positions are projected at 58,000, and that there's a 25% benefit premium associated with each 1.0 FTE that we create. So we factor that into the costs. We've assumed that every new elementary section actually creates 1.3 FTE. And that deals with the classroom teacher, or at the 7th and 8th grade level, the 5 main academic teachers, each at 0.2 for a section. And it assumes that somewhere in that 0.3, we need to add specials. And the specials we need to add are music, art, health, and physical education. Now, you know that in prior budget discussions here, right, we've used a factor of 1.2. We've increased it here to 1.3 because what we've found, as we've grown more, we've found that that's tightened, right? It's tightened on the schedules of those individuals. They have very tight schedules with very little very little passing time, and some of those schedules are actually too tight. So we created a bit of an allowance to create some flexibility in the schedules of those 4 areas. In terms of elementary language, we've assumed FTE related to section growth, right? Why have we separated this out as a separate assumption? Well, remember, those other classes all are used as prep time, right? Or are built into a 7th and 8th grader's day. Elementary world language is not. We've separated out because it's different. It is not one of the preps each week for a teacher, for a classroom teacher. And we've not changed that assumption here. We actually think there's value in having the classroom teacher be part of it. It was one of our original assumptions in the program and one we continue to believe in. Brookline High School, we currently have a 14.2, Mr. Rowe? 14.2 is the current student-to-teacher ratio. As we've talked about over the last number of years, it's much more difficult to go in and create what's necessary in terms of high school staffing as you add X number of students. What we've chosen to do here that we think is defensible is to utilize that 14.2 as a projection going forward. So we've utilized the 14.2 students to every teacher, and we've projected out our increases in high school enrollment, and we drive the number of high school teachers needed. That's actually the example we're going to show, right, is around high school staffing. So that's the example, one of the examples that we'll show you where we've applied that same student-to-teacher ratio. We've built into that the administrator FTEs who teach part-time. So you know that our administrators, which I include for this conversation, are associate deans, also teach 0.2, and that 0.2 is factored into that 14.2 students per teacher. Ms. Stone, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it
okay.
pertains to this
Yep.
slide. So 2 questions. One on the elementary world language. It says K to 5. Is that a misprint? You seem to be talking about K through 5 and 7, 8, and I wondered what happened to the 6th graders and how we're thinking about
Sorry.
that.
So because about 2 years ago in our budget, we changed the time allotment at 6th grade. We'd moved to the point where more and more of our 6th grades
in terms of teacher assignments, in terms of grouping patterns, were part of the middle level program. 2 years ago in our budget, we did the same thing with world language. We turned it into a 45-minute block. So we actually include them with 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Okay, terrific. So
Okay.
so the pedagogical model for 6 is the same as 7 and 8
That's
for
correct.
world language.
That's correct.
Terrific. Okay, great. So, and on the high school, so one of my concerns as we move forward in our projections on enrollments is we're already talking about a much larger high school. And I'm curious about the assumptions we're using about staffing, because this assumption suggests that we envision simply growing our existing organization of the high school to meet the number of enrolled students. And it seems to me that for this, as well as, I mean, you mentioned the DEVO growth, that at both of those schools where we are moving into a situation where we have more students than we have ever done with our existing pedagogical model, which we know works very well at certain sizes, but I wondered whether you are thinking, I'm sure you haven't developed it yet, but I do believe we need to be thinking differently about what those schools are going to look like.
Right.
And so simply expanding the existing structure to meet the number of students doesn't quite fit with what we might need to be projecting in terms of operating if the structure of taking care of schools that size changes.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, where I thought you were going with the high school, which is really along the same lines of this particular set of assumptions, does not address if the solution is not one high school.
No, that's right. That's my other point, which I was going to leave till later,
Yeah.
is that we need
Doesn't
to
address it at all. It doesn't, let me say this. I don't believe it addresses I believe it addresses a total number of teachers and librarians and other positions within an elementary school. What it doesn't address, which would be particularly at Devotion, I think, is what other kinds of things that we do with the building that drive program model. I'll give one example, which this particular parent I think would probably be maybe a bit upset if they knew I was using this as an example, but I think it's a good one. I had a parent at the Devotion Forum that asked if we had any plans of looking at, I mean, there are many, many different models of how you make large schools feel small, and yes, to the question earlier, we are in the process of looking at any number of them in terms of our larger schools and what we can do when we have an opportunity to restructure the physical plant to meet those programmatic needs. And but one way to do that I've seen in some places is they actually do something very specific with the 7th and 8th grade in terms of the grouping, and some have even located a number of the other services there. For example, in this forum, you may remember, it was suggested, would you ever consider a second library there that's devoted to middle grades and has those kinds of materials and that kind of literature and whatever? Sure, we'd consider looking at it. And this model doesn't take that into account because that drives a different kind of staffing in terms of some particular positions. And we'll have to adjust this along the line as we go. We're trying to give them a big picture at this point, but you're absolutely right.
I appreciate that. I do think that certainly from our experience last night with the Override Study Committee, I think they would certainly appreciate hearing that kind of analysis when this is presented.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We'll actually make sure we build that in as another of the assumptions, just to make sure that we deal with that issue, even if we aren't dealing with the dollars. Thank you. So this is a big area in terms of this discussion that we've had for a number of years around, where we haven't managed to keep up with ratios. And so we've made some assumptions about these positions, as I say here, that have not been adjusted over the years as enrollment has grown. And what we've utilized is some combination. Well, let me say this. What we've utilized are the professional association recommendations in these areas, except in one case, and that's high school guidance counselors, and I'll explain in a second what we did there. But so we've made some assumptions in terms of nursing, psychologists, K-8 guidance counselors, high school guidance counselors, and library staffing to meet
to meet these ratios. And we've used these ratios from their professional associations. The high school, actually, the professional association recommendation is 250 to 1, but Lenny Liebenzahn, our head of guidance at the high school, who's terrific, by the way, has done some great work for us in terms of looking at the Metro West and what the norms tend to be in the Metro West, and it's more in the range of 185 to 1. So we've used for these projections 200 to 1. We're actually better than that. You'll see that. That's right, because we use that chart. You'll see that we're actually, this is one area at the high school where we're actually ahead of the national norm right now, but you'll see how quickly we fall behind if we don't keep up as the enrollment starts to grow. So we built assumptions around our schools, assuming the enrollment that we've assumed through the B-Space recommendations and the particular modeling approved by the school committee. So we've built our models that way in terms of looking at the total number of students and what that might mean in terms of each of these areas. And you'll see in that particular chart some really stark differences, as I think you would predict. Special education and ELL, because we don't have better data now, particularly in ELL, we've assumed that they grow with the overall population growth. Now, we're going to take another look at that before next week, because it could very well be, as some have suggested, that we're seeing slightly different patterns in ELL than we're seeing in our overall enrollment growth, and that perhaps we should adjust to meet that differing pattern. We're going to take a look and see if it's that different that it requires a separate adjustment. Special education support, again, areas where we've not necessarily increased by the numbers that we needed to increase by over the years, including occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech and language, and BCBAs. So we've made some assumptions about those patterns and projected them forward. That brings the staffing to recommended standard in FY15. Administration is one that we continue to work with, both system level and building-based administration. Let me talk about building-based for a second. So we've made some assumptions around the projected size of each of our schools, and in particular the number of vice principals necessary. So we've projected a devotion school of 1,000 students forward as a principal and 3 vice principals for our model for now. Someone said to me at the conference I was just at, might you look at a different, to your point, might you look at a different configuration with 2 principals in the building, 1 in the middle? Of course we might. But we believe for now we're close enough for this discussion, again, with the caveat of another assumption that many of these things will depend on what we're going to do program-wise in these schools in the end. Same kinds of things at schools of 800. We've projected them as a principal and 2 assistants. We've been down this road of this discussion before in terms of the evaluation and student and teacher responsibilities. We've also made some projections around Brookline High School associated essentially with a school that's 1/3 larger. Again, does that take into account the potential that it's not a Brookline High School, one Brookline High School solution? Somewhat, but not completely. And don't forget, we've made an accommodation for at least a 3-year school located at the old Lincoln School and the administration associated with that. So we believe, as we've said to you a number of times, that for FY16, 17, 18, we are running something for some number of kids, read that as around 400 to 500, at the old Lincoln School on a short-term 3-year basis while these other 2 projects are completed. And that requires an administration and a teaching staff. The teaching staff, we believe we largely have built in here. What wasn't built in is the administration for that 450-student-ish school. We've built that into the assumptions here. District level, a number of these, again, are some of them we believe are positions that have been reduced. 2 of those positions on that list. And again, this is not necessarily the set of positions. It's examples of what they could be. But 2 of those positions are positions that we reduced.
The centralized registrar, we believe, actually creates capacity for the secretarial staff at buildings and creates a much better system of registering students. And the other two are positions that we've projected forward around areas that we've spent some time on with you talking about, out-of-school time and community engagement. Program enhancements. This is the one area that I wouldn't say these are necessarily related to enrollment growth, although one could certainly make the argument that they are. We had a discussion the other day about steps to success, for instance, and whether you want to say for the time being that a proposal to increase the STEP staffing by X number is related to the fact that we'll have X number more students, or whether you want to say that it may be related to the fact that the program, and we believe that the program should be offered either in the early elementary grades and or to students beyond public housing. We've tried to build some assumptions in to capture that here, right? Whether people believe in the end we have or not, we'll see, but we've tried to do that. We've also tried to build some assumptions in around I'll say, a elementary and challenge support model. That is not the enrichment and challenge support model, but it is a model that we believe we can support financially out of this that we have recommended out of program review. Our literacy initiative is going to require some additional funding to put in place. We've not kept up in textbook and supply. And when I say things like innovation, it may help for people to hear examples. We actually consider and have in your budgets over the last number of years considered projects like Landmark to be innovation, right? And we have schools that we haven't finished, and we've had to slow that project down because of budgets over the last number of years. Let me just finish this one real quick. We also have building support. We have at least 100 to 200,000 square feet added onto buildings in the plans that the school committee has put forward. And obviously there are costs associated with energy, with building service and custodial, and that additional space. So we've tried to make some allowance for that in this. Let me stop there before I go into the last slide.
Just a quick comment. I think when you talk about increase to textbook and supply budgets,
Yes.
you might want to increase library materials as well. Some of that will come under instructional technology, but the library increase in circulation has really jumped, and as our population goes up, I think we need to increase our library materials.
So thank you for that. So we have not specified but that as a separate item, but on some level, maybe not enough, we'll go back and look. We believe it's captured within an increase. But again, it's not, we don't divide this budget up. Maybe we should, and maybe that's something we should do as part of these discussions in order to make sure we're really transparent about it. But we have increased the number that presently is associated with that line.
Sort of fun that Barbara and I went to the same item with very different questions about it. So the increase to textbook, in particular the increase to textbooks in the budget, it seems to me has an interplay with the technology projections of going to a one-to-one, for example. Right. I know a lot of districts that have gone to those models have been saving a lot of money because textbooks that are available, so many textbooks are now being available, right, or made available as downloadable, and which may have some advantages in terms of what's in those textbooks and what you can do with them as well. So I just want to be careful when we're talking about things like increasing textbooks that we don't forget to say that that is a part of, that looking at that keeping that as a dynamic part of the conversation around the budget is a part of our conversations, because otherwise I think it just looks like we're not paying attention to
that's a very good point. So on the practical level, what we've not done to this point, and I think we'll have a good opportunity tomorrow, starting with the principals, is we've not really crosswalked these two budgets, right? I mean, we did it in part because originally when Mr. Moore gave us the technology budget, he had some, because he's technology and libraries, he had some library staffing built in there. We moved it here. We've not done it with that particular item yet, and we need to do that before next week. So thanks for that. So now what I'm going to do is turn this over to Mr. Rowe, who's going to take you through, just for tonight, a couple of examples of what this has driven, right, in terms of our discussions. Mr. Rowe.
So we just have two examples that we want to show you quickly to frame what the impact of the projections is, how it affects staffing. And this one is for regular education staff. We've broken it out for the elementary grades, K-8, and for the high school. And this is based on enrollment projections that we have for these years, 15 through 22. So that the pattern would be that we'd grow somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 positions at the elementary level and just over 5 at the high school. And these are based on the factors that Superintendent reviewed earlier, which is at K-8, it's 1.3 for every additional section of students. And at the high school, it's based on the current ratio carried forward. What you actually notice here is that for the next 5 years is when we'll have the most significant growth. In other words, that's when the most significant growth of enrollment is expected to be. And then for the 3 years, 20 through 22, what we see is that the growth really levels off at the elementary grades but continues at the high school. So that's the pattern that we actually see when we look at enrollments projected forward, and it's reflected in the staffing pattern. We've carried those numbers forward, and it's based on those FTEs that we see the annual projection for growth of cost. So what this essentially is saying is that over that period of time, we'd see somewhere for regular ed teachers only, if that enrollment plays out and that level, and this is not inflated for collective bargaining, doesn't include steps, essentially. This is just the base budget section for enrollment growth at current dollars. This is over $1 million item next year, and numbers that certainly range near that for each of the next few years. So this really, I think, just out of the box frames the concern we have and why we advocated for an override study review, because we're not in a position where the cost of enrollment growth is sustainable given the regular budget. And in fact, that's what the presentation is going to be next Wednesday night to the committee, which is first Sean Cronin, Deputy Town Administrator, will come in and will look at those traditional issues that we have normally faced when we look at health insurance, when we look at collective bargaining, when we look at those structural items that are in our budget, and then see what the impact is when we have to add on enrollment and what we refer to as restoring other program areas to a standard that we think is appropriate. Another model of this is what we've done for the guidance for K-8, and the ratios we used were 350 for K-8. We actually used 195 in the analysis for guidance at the high school. And so what this shows is that if we look at our current staffing, which is 12 guidance counselors at the elementary grades and 8 at the high school, and so we have 20.2 this year. If we apply those standards and look at our enrollment growth, the difference in each of these cells as we move forward is actually reflected here, where you see we have a big jump in year 1. In other words, the need for 3.1 guidance counselors at the elementary grades. Next year, 1.6 at the high school in order to get back to that standard. And then we grow incrementally each year. And again, the dollars to pay for that are reflected annually in this chart. So we've done this for all the areas that we're talking about. And so that's an example. One thing I just wanted to bring you back to, you recall annually when we put the budget together, we've historically done multi-year projections. And as we look out through the years, what we've done in the past is shown that we have a structural deficit. And as we've talked about enrollment, the areas that are highlighted here are program improvements. I'm going to bring glasses on. Program improvements, enrollment, and contingency, and other. And as we put the budget together in the February period, looking to the future years, remember this is This is what we put together last February, looking out to FY15, the budget that we're about to move forward on. We've essentially, at the time, we said that's going to be at minimum $1 million. So that number is pretty close to the number that we're saying now. It looks to be just the regular education cost of staffing the section growth we believe we'll have at the elementary and the high school level. What this really shows is that these are relatively tight numbers when we put them together a year ago to do some projections. And now we need to inform these with better data that we have today and look at the issue of bringing a number of our areas of staffing to standard to make sure we can provide the services that are expected by the community.
Happy to take any questions that you may have on this and where we are as of today.
Questions for Mr. Rowe or Dr. Lupini?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take you back to so I'm pretty sure what I heard was that I know that chart was May and that those numbers aren't real. The last chart, right, was from last May. Right. So there are things in there that those are not current numbers for anything. So we looked at the growth in guidance staff and the projected growth there, and that gets factored into your budget projections. But then we were also, the previous slide was just the regular education teachers. So, but there were a lot of other assumptions about the 1.3 and all of those things. Where does that come out?
So great, thank you. We've done this for every one of those areas. Okay. What we wanted to show you tonight, because it's what we want to show you examples. We have a lot of work to do between now and next Wednesday to finish that out, to actually plot it out in terms of each year, where we think it needs to fall in terms of each year in a similar way. But we wanted to show you two examples of what those assumptions look like in sort of real application tonight. So we have drafts of all of them. We'll be going through them with principals tomorrow morning and then have them ready for Wednesday evening.
Great. And can I just follow up one question?
Absolutely.
Can you...
And by the way, can I just say that K through 8 number assumes the 1.3.
Okay.
Right? That's we use that as the assumption. Every new section means 1.3 FTE. That's what's driving that. That's what drove that.
Okay.
Can we stick to that for a minute? I know you have another question, but I wanted to ask a question. Why is the drop in fiscal year 22 in the number of K through 8 teachers?
Because if you use the numbers we use, which are 630
Yeah.
and 600,
Yeah.
remember our first grade class is 675 students. We actually hit a year out there in 22 where our elementary enrollment drops.
Because it's 600 instead of 630?
Because our current first grade is 675.
They exit that year.
If they exit that year and we bring in 600 students,
Right.
that's 75 fewer students
Okay.
at the elementary level. So the answer is this will go up and down by certain amounts.
All right.
We would assume that we'd consolidate some sections, or, well, we wouldn't really have to. We'd graduate more sections at the high end than we bring in at the low end. So.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Ms. Stone. We were at that slide, and so I didn't want to.
So I just had a question about our assumptions about teacher costs and what's built in as an assumption in the long-range projections in terms of collective bargaining.
And so that's what I'm working on with Mr. Cronin. So that in the presentation that we're going to be doing with the Override Study Committee, what we wanted to do was break out those costs that are not related to enrollment from enrollment costs, so that what this does what this does is it separates out steps and lanes, it separates out collective bargaining, it separates so that those will move forward with these obviously, but we'll carry them in a separate box, if you will. We wanted to just focus on enrollment going forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Chang?
And
Oh, sorry.
the other thing I want to say is once we get past, as you just observed, looking at last May's
Right.
figures for next year, once we get past a one-year projection here, these are range numbers, even though they
Oh,
end
they
in
always
accurate.
are, I understand
Yeah,
that.
right,
There's,
so.
there are lots of assumptions built into it. I just
Yeah.
understood that there was a placeholder, and yes, thank you.
Mr. Chang?
Well, let me stay on the last chart. There is a line that says step increase net of retirement.
That's correct. And the reason that I wanted you to just focus on the three lines that are highlighted
Yeah.
was to show that those are the ones that actually related to either enrollment growth or program enhancement. And it's that's the body of the presentation that the superintendent just talked about.
Right.
And what we'll talk about separately over and above when Sean says, and here's the, if you will, the fundamental cost drivers that we face without growth.
Right.
In other words, a maintenance of effort budget. And then there's the growth factors, which are either driven by enrollment or driven by the need and desire to enhance programs.
Right, but there's still a big question mark as to going forward, the impact of collective bargaining.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yes, and you'll see that in what Mr. Cronin talks about on Wednesday.
Right.
And that's also why, just to point out, that's why when we do charts like this, the collective bargaining is always with an asterisk.
Right.
And because there is no way to assume, basically.
Other questions? You're letting him off easy. I agree.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be your last time. So next Thursday, similar sort of presentation based on assumptions and then numbers around that vision of technology. Dr. Fisher-Mueller, Mr. Rowe, Mr. Moore have done really terrific work. We're bringing that into the home stretch. We're not sure if we're actually going to be doing that next Wednesday. If you think about it, between Mr. Cronin's presentation and this presentation, we think we can pretty much occupy a couple hours. And so we may get to the technology presentation at another override study meeting. So this is where we are. Again, we'll be working with principals tomorrow and ready for next Wednesday night. Thanks a lot.
Well, that's a lot of work. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was all so clear. Appreciate it. We have to move along. We're waiting for the school committee to organize.
How are you, Mr. Lucky?
Sorry. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you some comments about the superintendent's evaluation. You know that the document, at least the draft that I sent to you, was 10 pages long, single-spaced, and you should be thrilled to know that I'm not going to read it all. Oh, I know how depressed you are, Dr. Lupini. Yeah. But this is going to be longer than I had anticipated, and so let me just go through it quickly. So during this coming Monday, the document itself will be posted on the Public Schools of Brookline's website, as it has been in the past. And the document describes the substance of our feedback from all sources and our conclusions. And for the committee's benefit, let me say that as a result of helpful editing by Ms. Scotto, the final version differs from the draft I sent out last Saturday. But nothing has changed from a substantive point of view, and I appreciate Ms. Gatto having studied it carefully. On Tuesday, October 10, as you know, we devoted a workshop to this task. And if the public is interested, the Brookline tab covered that workshop. This session included hearing from the superintendent regarding his self-evaluation, a sharing with the committee by myself and Vice Chairman Ditkoff regarding the results of our community and staff feedback, as well as the feedback from the interviews the two of us conducted with 1/3 of the superintendent's senior reports. Each school committee member then shared his or her own observations regarding the superintendent's performance. We also discussed our plans to accomplish this task for next year when we are required to be in full compliance with the superintendent evaluation regulations promulgated by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. For the record, we view these regulations as rigorous and constructive. The objectives of our evaluation process will remain as they are today, namely, to provide the superintendent with a meaningful process for his or her professional growth and support, to provide the school committee with sufficient feedback on which to make reasonable judgments about the superintendent's future employment and compensation, and to provide the public schools of Brookline staff and parents, as well as Brookline community members, with an opportunity to be heard on their impression of the superintendent's strengths and challenges so that the superintendent's relationship with the community can be understood and strengthened effectively. It's worth noting that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has put out regulations for the evaluation of all educators. The required evaluation process for our senior managers is very similar to that for our superintendent. The evaluation process is designed to be dynamic, that is to say, an ongoing rather than once-a-year phenomenon. It should start prior to the beginning of the academic year by setting so-called SMART goals. I know that SMART has come up before tonight. For each individual, SMART means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. During the year, the superintendent collects evidence relevant for each of his SMART goals. Halfway through the year, say late January or early February, the school committee chairman and vice chairman will do a check-in with the superintendent, a so-called mid-cycle review to assess progress towards the achievement of the goals. Depending on what has happened during the year, it could be appropriate to revise the goals. Ideally, at the end of the academic year, the school committee would then solicit feedback from staff and community. The direct interviews mentioned earlier would happen early in the summer. Then once again, ideally in July, the school committee devotes a workshop to the summative evaluation of the superintendent. I should say here that if the evaluation is good, and this one is, then the school committee and superintendent have the option of going through this process over a 2-year cycle. All of us have agreed at least one more yearly cycle, however. This year we were late in accomplishing this process due to a number of unanticipated activities, including, but hardly limited to, the B-Space work necessary to result in a capital expansion plan voted by the school committee in early fall, along with a number of state-mandated initiatives such as the implementation of the educator evaluation system. So now I'd like to move to the contents of this year's evaluation document. Our document reviews the particularly difficult environment during this past year, which I have touched on already. It then proceeds to review the feedback from staff and community I mentioned earlier, followed by our assessment of the superintendent's performance. This assessment is divided up into 4 standards set by the state: instructional leadership, management and operations, family and community engagement, and professional culture. For each standard, the regulations call for one of the following ratings: exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. Our document also includes several other observations contributed by school committee members, and an overall conclusion. So for the summary of the evaluation itself, let's move to instructional leadership. And for each of the 4 standards, I will mention some relevant experts. I'm not going to read the whole evaluation in any case. The committee was very pleased and impressed with the educator evaluation agreement the superintendent has forged with the Brookline Educators Union. Through our feedback, we determined that the superintendent's vision of setting and implementing high standards for all and of enabling students to understand that they are all expected to achieve to the maximum of their ability was clear for the leadership in all our schools. The superintendent supported specific important initiatives which were part of his tentatively identified goals. For example, with regard to literacy, the benchmark assessment system, the Literacy Collaborative in collaboration with Lesley University, the Level Literacy Intervention, so-called LLI program, and the K-8 Literacy Initiative. The superintendent is very aware of the important and growing role of technology in teaching and learning. He's studying it, as he already told you, right now. Based on our outside feedback, school staff felt that increasing the superintendent's periodic presence in the schools and classrooms was important. He felt the same way. There was also consistent feedback that the school administration and teaching staff missed the availability of data that informs teaching and learning, and that had to do with some of the cuts we made earlier this past year. Based on this information, and more not included here, the school committee judged the superintendent to have done proficient work with regard to this standard. So let me turn to management and operations. Many of the superintendent's direct reports were extremely appreciative of his responsiveness, of his advice in proposing possible solutions to new and complex issues as they arose, and his willingness to back them up when they made necessary but unpopular decisions. Virtually all commended him on keeping everyone informed and of discussing plans well ahead of time. His direct reports were pleased with the consistency of budget decisions with both his teaching and learning vision and the strategic plan core values, especially equity. With regard to equity, many noted favorably his commitments to the METCO, Steps to Success, and special education programs. Feedback regarding his handling of the late opening of Runkle School, along with the major safety security concerns emerging from the Newtown and Marathon tragedies, were all extremely positive. Both the committee and the administration had, earlier in the year, been concerned about a spending rate, and you heard about this earlier tonight, which threatened substantial spending in excess of budget. Shortly after school resumed this September, and you really heard about this tonight, the school committee learned that our total expenditures had come in several $100,000 under budget. The combination of a temporary freeze on new hires and the savings which occurred as a result of the superintendent's reorganization of home-based special student services produced this very positive year-end result. The superintendent himself acknowledged that due to lack of time, he was not able to complete his evaluation of his senior reports. He's working to complete this now, nor was he able to devote adequate time to the variety of space issues which emerged, especially during the B-Space deliberations. Some on the leadership suggested that if the planning for new programs could be done over a longer period of time, this would enable leadership to dwell longer on possible solutions and result in a more substantive leadership buy-in of the superintendent's decisions. Several teachers expressed concern about the number of initiatives being implemented and observed that this burden virtually eliminated time for reflection. Some were also tired of what they felt was an overemphasis on student growth and space issues. This past year uncovered a major time bottleneck for the superintendent. As a result, both the superintendent and the school committee have begun to discuss how this issue might most effectively be addressed. Today, the central office is at a lower staffing level than it was 7 years ago, when our student body was more than 30% smaller. One of our district goals involves this central office analysis. Based on this information and more not included here, the school committee judged the superintendent to have done proficient work with regard to this standard. I'll move to family and community engagement. All felt that the superintendent communicated well during his parent forum sessions, which include all schools, plus METCO and CPAC. There were several comments from PTO leadership commending the periodic meetings of all PTO leadership as an effective way for the superintendent to communicate important system-wide messages. The superintendent was also viewed as very effective in developing and maintaining solid collaboration between, on the one hand, the public schools of Brookline and the other town departments such as recreation, health, police, and as well-known as the well-known community-wide resources such as Brookline Community Mental Health Center, the very new Brookline Teen Center, and the three foundations, including the 21st Century Fund, the Brookline Education Foundation, and the Brookline Community Foundation. It was noted that the superintendent spends a meaningful amount of time dealing successfully directly with parent questions and complaints. Some observed that the superintendent's support of the development of the child support teams has resulted in a more effective family outreach. Some observed that in order to free up time, the superintendent might consider delegating more of the parent communication function to another senior report. Some questioned whether he was reaching all parents, guardians, or whether some cohorts, especially younger couples, low-income families, and parents of children entering the schools from 6th grade on, might not be comfortable participating in the existing parent forums. Based on this information, and more not included here, the school committee judged the superintendent to have done exemplary work with regard to this standard. The last one is professional culture. As mentioned in the instructional leadership section above, the superintendent's emphasizes his commitment to high standards for all, as reflected in the system's goal that each student be able to achieve his or her maximum capacity. This vision sets the professional tone. Linked to this is his passion for seeing to it that all students have equitable resources available to them. The superintendent has clearly shared this vision with his staff. However, as he noted in his self-evaluation, he had planned to create and distribute a complete set of updated vision documents for the public schools of Brookline, which he now plans to do in concert with the revision of the Public Schools of Brookline Strategic Plan. One interviewee mentioned 3 discussions led by the superintendent at a retreat: what it meant to be a Brookline educator, educator evaluation, and cultural proficiency. These discussions were at a particularly high level of abstraction and resulted in a closer understanding and alignment of the team around an understanding of the professional culture with the Brookline by the district. The school committee has always supported the superintendent's observation that especially in the K-12 education business, our whole system must continue to support the idea of continuous learning. A few teachers gave the superintendent low marks regarding professional culture. We can only speculate that this may have resulted from the superintendent not being as visible this year in the schools. Based on this information and more not included here, the school committee judged the superintendent to have done proficient work with regard to this standard. So then we made an overall conclusion. This year was especially challenging for all. The superintendent himself was disappointed and frustrated by not being able to achieve several of the goals he had set out for himself. Nevertheless, he has continued to guide our system proficiently through numerous temporary roadblocks, all the while seeing to it that our children are educated based on high learning standards for all. There is much work left to be done. We applaud our superintendent's efforts, his candor, and his professionalism, and encourage him to continue to manage our growing and diverse education system for the benefit of our students and community. Vice Chairman Ditkoff could not attend tonight because of important business overseas. You should know that she was a full partner in all of this work, and she deserves thanks not only from me, but all of us. Thank you, and I welcome any comments and questions. goodness.
And you know I don't say that often.
No kidding. Thank you very much for that.
I thought that was a really terrific review of our conversation, which we had with Bill earlier in the fall, and I just want to echo all of the things that you said, and just to remind everyone that in this new evaluation environment, that in an era where excellence is prized and everybody wants to be advanced, and I'm sure having set up exemplary as the sort of A+, it doesn't feel to anybody who gets rated proficient, and certainly doesn't sound, it's such a boring word, it doesn't sound like it is a true compliment. It doesn't sound like you're getting an A. And I just want to dispel that illusion that proficient is an extraordinary endorsement of a job well done, and I hope it's received that way.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Well, is there any new business that we have tonight that anyone proposes? Hearing none, we do have an executive session to conduct, and the purpose is to discuss strategy with regard to pending litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the public body, and the chair so declares. We will reconvene in open session only for the purpose of immediate adjournment. Ms. Coyne, would you please poll the members?
Yes.
Do I have a choice? Yes.
Yes, and you'll call me from there?
We will do. And Helen, Helen, are you still there?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to get your assurance when we move to the other room that you don't have anybody with you.